Before we get into what the four sides of the psyche are, let's make sure we are on the same page as to what ego means. Ego is a Greek word that simply means I. Ego is referring to the self of a person that distinguishes itself from the selves of others. The modern usage of the word ego has changed it into something bad and horrible and relates it to narcissism, pride, and selfishness. This is not the definition I will be using anytime I ever say ego. If someone is displaying those negative qualities, I will use those words. Ego will never mean the negative connotation that it has developed into in any of my videos. Egoism is an ethical theory where the interest of self is above others. This is much like the flight attendant telling you to put your mask on first before helping others put their mask on. It is not a bad thing in and of itself. Everything is situational. In fact, helping others when you are incapable of helping yourself ends up helping no one and causes more destruction rather than the positive, idealistic outcome many believe will come from constantly putting others before yourself. That is a false sense of altruism. Knowing when to put yourself first and when to put others first is a skill many need to learn. It is about balance. That is a key theme you will hear me say over and over again. Equilibrium. Balance is the key. It is not a one-size-fits-all where you have to always put others first to be a good person, nor is it a one-size-fits-all where you must put yourself first before others in order to survive. We are all in this together, after all. Egocentric, once again, is not a bad thing in and of itself. It simply means you put your interests, beliefs, and attitudes before others. This could mean you need to do what is best for you to succeed, rather than doing what others want or think you should do. However, always putting your interests, beliefs, and attitudes before others can cause issues, such as in a relationship where you never do what your partner enjoys. This is where you start to become selfish. It is an imbalance. Once again, everything is situational and depends on the circumstances. The general definition in the Oxford Dictionary for ego is a person's sense of self-esteem or self-importance. You will come to learn when I do my cognitive functions video that this definition is only referring to the cognitive function introverted feeling, which is only one of 8 cognitive functions that comprises the ego. The psychoanalysis definition in the Oxford Dictionary for ego is the part of the mind that mediates between the conscious and the unconscious and is responsible for reality testing and a sense of personal identity. In this video, I explain that the part of the mind which mediates between the conscious and the unconscious is the subconscious, which is associated with the anima or animus, whereas reality testing and sense of personal identity is once again only related to the introverted feeling cognitive function. The philosophical definition in the Oxford Dictionary for ego is a conscious thinking subject. This simply means ego is a subject that is aware of itself and its surroundings. Basically, it can differentiate itself from everything else. That is the best definition to understand what the true ego represents. The 4 sides, or the 4 aspects of the psyche, are persona, anima, shadow, and superego. These 4 aspects, when integrated as a whole, form the self, your true ego. The persona is the outward-facing portion of our ego that we are conscious of. It is who we initially believe is our identity. This is the false ego, which will go through an ego death in order to find the self. In the concept of duality regarding the mind, the persona is associated with good and light. However, good does not mean holy, and light is the false light. It is a deception, a mask, veiling our true self. The shadow is buried in the unconscious, where the parts of ourself that we have suppressed, repressed, and denied reside. This is the evil and darkness of the duality of the mind. However, this evil isn't actually bad, and the darkness is only due to lack of awareness. These are aspects of ourselves we don't associate with our identity and project onto others until we have completed our shadow work and recognize that we are the asshole in our life making things difficult, not the other guys we projected our shadow onto, who we keep blaming for our problems. In Archetypes in the Collective Unconscious by Carl Jung, he writes, the unconscious is commonly regarded as a sort of encapsulated fragment of our most personal and intimate life, something like what the Bible calls the heart, and considers the source of all evil thoughts. In the chambers of the heart dwell the wicked blood spirits, swift anger, and sensual weakness. This is how the unconscious looks when seen from the conscious side. But consciousness appears to be essentially an affair of the cerebrum, which sees everything separately and in isolation, and therefore sees the unconscious in this way too, regarding it outright as my unconscious. Hence, it is generally believed that anyone who descends into the unconscious gets into a suffocating atmosphere of egocentric subjectivity, and in this blind alley is exposed to the attack of all the ferocious beasts which the caverns of the psychic underworld are supposed to harbor. True, whoever looks into the mirror of the water will see first of all his own face. Whoever goes to himself risks a confrontation with himself. The mirror does not flatter. It faithfully shows whatever looks into it, namely, the face we never show the world because we cover it with a persona, the mask of the actor. But the mirror lies behind the mask and shows the true face. This confrontation is the first test of courage on the inner way, a test sufficient to frighten off most people, for the meeting with ourselves belongs to the more unpleasant things that can be avoided so long as we can project everything negative into the environment. But if we are able to see our own shadow and can bear knowing about it, then a small part of the problem has already been solved. We have at least brought up the personal unconscious. The shadow is a living part of the personality and therefore wants to live with it in some form. It cannot be argued out of existence or rationalized into harmlessness. The problem is exceedingly difficult because it not only challenges the whole man, but reminds him at the same time of his helplessness and ineffectuality. The anima or animus is the complementary or dual to the persona. It is the masculine or feminine counterpart to the persona. If your persona is more masculine, your subconscious will be more feminine and thus will be an anima. Whereas if your persona is more feminine, your subconscious will be more masculine and thus will be an animus. Some personality types are more masculine than others, and some personality types are more feminine than others. This is related to the cognitive stack, which is dependent upon the order of the cognitive functions and which archetype it falls in. I do not think that the anima or animus is dependent upon your biological gender, but on the placement of your thinking and sensing functions, which are more masculine qualities, versus the placement of your intuitive and feeling functions, which are more feminine. How those functions are organized creates a personality type. Any person, male or female, can have any of the 16 personality types. However, it is more common for biological males to have a more masculine personality type, and for biological females to have a more feminine personality type. But this is not always the case. Carl Jung says in his book Psychological Types, the inner personality is the way one behaves in relation to one's inner psychic processes. It is the inner attitude, the characteristic face that is turned towards the unconscious. I call the outer attitude the outward face, the persona. The inner attitude, the inward face, I call the anima. As to the character of the anima, my experience confirms the rule that it is, by and large, complementary to the character of the persona. The anima usually contains all those common human qualities which the conscious attitude lacks. The tyrant tormented by bad dreams, gloomy forebodings, and inner fears is a typical figure, outwardly ruthless, harsh, and unapproachable, He jumps inwardly at every shadow, is at the mercy of every mood, as though he were the feeblest and most impressionable of men. Thus, his anima contains all those fallible human qualities his persona lacks. If the persona is intellectual, the anima will quite certainly be sentimental. A very feminine woman has a masculine soul, and a very masculine man has a feminine soul. This contrast is due to the fact that a man is not in all things wholly masculine, but also has certain feminine traits. The more masculine his outer attitude is, the more his feminine traits are obliterated. Instead, they appear in his unconscious. This explains why it is just those very virile men who are most subject to characteristic weaknesses. Their attitude to the unconscious has a womanish weakness and impressionability. Conversely, it is often just the most feminine women who in their inner lives display an intractability, an obstinacy, and a willfulness that are to be found with comparable intensity only in a man's outer attitude. These are masculine traits which, excluded from the womanly outer attitude, have become qualities of her soul. If therefore we speak of the anima of a man, we must logically speak of the animus of a woman, if we are to give the soul of a woman its right name. Whereas logic and objectivity are usually the predominant features of a man's outer attitude, or are at least regarded as ideals. In the case of a woman, it is feeling. But in the soul, it is the other way around. Inwardly, it is the man who feels and the woman who reflects. Hence, a man's greater liability to total despair, while a woman can always find a comfort and hope. Accordingly, a man is more likely to put an end to himself than a woman. However much a victim of social circumstances a woman may be, as a prostitute, for instance, a man is no less a victim of impulses from the unconscious, taking the form of alcoholism and other vices. According to the psychoanalytic theory of Sigmund Freud, the superego is the ethical component of the personality and provides the moral standards by which the ego operates. Superego's criticisms, prohibitions, and inhibitions form a person's conscience, and its positive aspirations and ideals represent one's idealized self-image or ego ideal. This is not what I mean by superego. This is referring to an individual conscience, of which Jung bases on a collision between the ego and the inner world of archetypes. Freud is describing another aspect of the cognitive function, introverted feeling. The placement of the cognitive function, introverted feeling, will greatly affect how you experience this individual conscience, as the placement will be influenced by the archetype behind it. I would like to make a note that Freud was an ISTJ who had FI child. That means his introverted feeling function, which is related to such things as reality testing, personal preferences and valuations, as well as moral beliefs and standards, fell under the archetype of the child. It is the function closely related to our inner child. His ability to understand other people's perspectives and value systems, which is related to extroverted feeling, fell under the trickster archetype, sometimes called the blind spot. It baffles me how horribly wrong he is about the root causes of personality, and it is concerning to me that his theory was pushed in institutions over Carl Jung. In fact, many psychology professors were instructed to not discuss Carl Jung. As we are all becoming very aware, our education system hasn't exactly been working for the people to help us grow, but to indoctrinate us into false belief systems through misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda. When I say superego, I am referring to the collective self, which is comprised of the collective unconscious, which is made up of primitive archetypes. Just as I said in a prior video, the individual prana is linked to the soul, which psychologically speaking is associated with the anima or animus, while the universal prana is linked to the spirit, which psychologically speaking is associated with the superego. In Archetypes in the Collective Unconscious, Jung defines the collective unconscious as such: The collective unconscious is a part of the psyche which can be negatively distinguished from a personal unconscious by the fact that it does not, like the latter, owe its existence to personal experience and consequently is not a personal acquisition. While the personal unconscious is made up essentially of contents which have at one time been conscious, but which have disappeared from consciousness through having been forgotten or repressed, the contents of the collective unconscious have never been in consciousness, and therefore have never been individually acquired, but owe their existence exclusively to heredity. Whereas the personal unconscious consists for the most part of complexes, the content of the collective unconscious is made up essentially of archetypes. The concept of the archetype, which is an indispensable correlate of the idea of the collective unconscious, indicates the existence of definite forms in the psyche, which seem to be present always and everywhere. Mythological research calls them motifs. In the psychology of primitives, they correspond to Levi Bruhl's concept of representations collective. And in the field of comparative religion, they have been defined by Hubert and Moss as categories of the imagination. Adolf Bastian long ago called them elementary or primordial thoughts. From these references, it should be clear enough that my idea of the archetype, literally a pre-existent form, does not stand alone, but is something that is recognized and named in other fields of knowledge. My thesis, then, is as follows. In addition to our immediate consciousness, which is of a thoroughly personal nature, and which we believe to be the only empirical psyche, even if we tack on the personal unconscious as an appendix, there exists a second psychic system of the collective, universal, and impersonal nature, which is identical in all individuals. This collective unconscious does not develop individually, but is inherited. It consists of pre-existent forms, the archetypes, which can only become conscious secondarily, and which give definite form to certain psychic contents. The individuation process is accomplished by the personal and collective unconscious being brought into consciousness, as well as the integration and balancing of our masculine and feminine qualities to realize the self, our true, authentic ego. In my next depth psychology video coming out in 2 weeks, I will discuss the archetypes of the cognitive stack, also referred to as the cognitive roles. For more content like this, and to access exclusive content, become a Patreon. There's a link provided in the description box. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment below. Train the body, master the mind, embrace the heart, know the soul, and find the self. Quaternity Yoga.